Hello, friends, and welcome to Spring at St. Andrew. It is my privilege to welcome you here today from the beautiful St. Andrew Sanctuary. I am grateful, as always, to share this sacred online space with you, where we are all invited, included, and valued as vital and beloved members of our broader worshiping community. St. Andrew is proud to be an open, affirming, inclusive congregation that welcomes all people into the full life and communion of our church. This includes saints and sinners, believers and skeptics, the lost and the found, the wanderers and the wanderers, families of all shapes and sizes, and people from every point along life's journey. No matter who you are or where you've been, no matter what you believe or even if you believe anything at all, you are welcome here and you belong here. If you have any questions about our church, prayer requests for our care team, or if you would like to get in touch with a member of our pastoral team or staff, please email info@gostandrew.com. If you would like to explore deeper engagement with the St. Andrew community through our many classes, group life gatherings, and service opportunities, you can email us directly at connect@gostandrew.com. We would love to hear from you. Just as a reminder, our full Sunday morning worship services, complete with music, prayer, announcements, liturgy, ministry spotlights, and the sermon, are live streamed on our YouTube page each week and permanently archived for viewing anytime. Lastly, to contribute a financial gift to the work and ministry of St. Andrew, you can always visit gostandrew.com/give or text St. Andrew to 28950. And now let's listen together to this week's scripture and sermon.
A reading from Mark 5, 1 through 13. They came to the other side of the sea, to the region of the Gerasenes. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with the unclean spirit met him. The man lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him any more, even with a chain, for he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from a distance, the man ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, the Son of Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" The man replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send him out of the region. Now there on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So Jesus gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, who stampeded down the steep bank and into the sea and were drowned by the sea. Thus ends the reading.
Over the last 4 weeks, we've explored some of the strangest stories in the Bible that on the surface seem so magical and mythological that we might have assumed they lack any relevance to our modern world. Stories about a smooth-talking donkey and some teen-mauling she-bears and a prophet swallowing fish and a bush that catches fire but is not consumed. Strange, irrational, implausible, eye-rolling, fantasy-landy stories that sound more like something we'd find in Aesop's fables than anything we might expect to read in the Bible. What makes them strange is that we know these things do not and cannot happen in the real world. But if after hearing these strange stories, we get hung up on whether donkeys can really talk, or we argue over how any human could possibly survive 3 days in the belly of a whale, then we've completely missed the point of them. The wise do not worry about whether donkeys can actually talk. The wise only care about what the donkey actually said. But just when you think you've seen the strangest story, the Bible gets even stranger and a whole lot spookier in the story we encounter today. A story about a man possessed by demons, on the loose and out of control, naked and out of his mind, howling like a wild animal and dragging his shackles and chains behind him through the local cemetery, where he lives out a tragic and desolate and banished existence. What do you find most strange about this story? Is it the odd detail about the man's demon possession, or the part about his broken shackles and chains, or that thing about his nakedness and howling, or the fact that he actually lives in the local cemetery? You can't make this stuff up. It's really in the Bible. And this story feels like a weird mashup of Stephen King's Pet Sematary and Tom Hanks' character in Castaway, and an episode or two of Naked and Afraid, and a little nod to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But it's not just a strange story. It's a profoundly sad one. A story about human suffering and anguish and the tragic ways entire communities will work so hard to keep people from becoming well. But to understand this and to understand why this story made its way into the Bible in the first place, it does help to know the backstory. On the day before this story takes place, Jesus is teaching along the shores of Galilee when he asks his disciples to go find a boat. He says to them, "Let's go across to the other side." Go across the other side. Here now in the life of Jesus, what we have is a threshold moment. A crossover journey, an experience of going from here to there, from the known to the unknown, from familiarity to vulnerability. Have you ever experienced a threshold moment? Joseph Campbell wrote a lot about what he described as the hero's journey, and how all great stories that humans tell always seem to turn on these threshold moments, when the hero leaves the ordinary world in pursuit of a calling, only then to encounter some force of resistance along the way. Campbell called these forces threshold guardians. Those guardians come in various forms: dragons, storms, self-doubt, or villains like the Wicked Witch of the West, or Voldemort, or Darth Vader. Well, Jesus and his disciples board a boat to cross over to the other side, and they encounter a storm. And the storm rages about them all night. The disciples think they're going to die, but Jesus, unfazed, sleeps right through it. Until, of course, he's awakened by his panic-stricken disciples. And that's when Jesus does something as disturbing to them as the very storm that's raging around them. Jesus rebukes the wind. He shouts at the storm. He says, "Siopao," in the Greek. That means, shut up. I love that detail of the story. Shut up, wind. I've heard enough from you already. I've got stuff to do, and you can't stop me. And just like that, the wind stops and the storm ceases, and they cross over to the other side. And it's now morning, and they finally reach the shore. And the moment Jesus steps out of the boat, things begin to change in the country of the Gerasenes. As Jesus sloshes through the water toward the shore, his steps create these ripples in the water that roll up on the sand and will soon reverberate throughout the entire community. Jesus has crossed over from the other side to bring change to the Gerasene community. And that change would not be welcomed. None of the disciples see the man as they step onto the shore, but His shouting startles them. And when they turn toward the noise, they see a skeleton of a man bowing down before Jesus and shouting at full volume, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" These disciples had just endured a midnight storm on the sea, only to now encounter this human storm on the Gerasene shoreline. This hurricane-like gale force wind swirling and thundering and rumbling inside the human wreckage of this lost and broken man. Hair matted, his body naked and bruised, covered in dirt and sores, with eyes afire with rage, and broken chains dangling from his wrists and ankles. Jesus searches the fevered eyes of this man, looking for a way through the darkness and into the heart of him. This man is unclean according to the story. The word is akatharta. That's the Greek word. The root word here is catharsis, which means to purge or to be cleansed from whatever it is that troubles you. We've all experienced catharsis, I'm sure, that feeling of unloading or releasing our emotional burdens and finding some genuine relief. Sometimes it's just a good hard cry, or a long conversation with someone, or a walk in the woods, or a session with a therapist, and we walk out and we say, "That was a cathartic experience for me." But this man is akatharta, cathartic. That is, without catharsis, unclean, holding something in, unpurged. Jesus looks mercifully past the darkness of the man's eyes. Eyes wild and troubled with something that makes everyone else want to look away. And Jesus doesn't look away. He looks within the man, searching for what it is that needs catharsis. What is it? Grief, anxiety, regret, shame? What is it that has broken this man, broken his hold on reality? When Jesus asks the man his name, that's when the truth begins to emerge. "Legion," the man howls. "My name is Legion." And at the sound of that word, legion, a whole chorus of voices hiss from inside that man. A legion is what they call the largest military unit of Roman troops. And by telling us that his name is Legion, we see that something more is going on in this story now. Something bigger than just one man whose life has gone off the rails. Maybe this man really is occupied or possessed by something awful, a disease, grief, schizophrenia, anxiety, addiction. Our inner demons come in many forms. But this right now is all beside the point, because with that name Legion, we know this man is a symbol of the entire community in which he lives. A community that is occupied by Rome. The entire region of the Gerasenes is possessed by this occupying military force, subjugated, overpowered, suppressed, and oppressed daily by a legion of Roman soldiers, whom all the occupied people of Gerasene call pigs. And so what does Jesus do as he peers into the eyes of this man, as he gazes upon these possessed, occupied Gerasenes? Jesus commands the demons to enter a herd of nearby pigs, who immediately stampede over a cliff and are drowned in the sea. And now what we thought is just a strange story about an exorcism of a demon-possessed man turns out to be something like a radical protest story against Rome's military occupation, which has a demonic nature of its own. The healing of this man mirrors the political situation of his community, a land under occupation, a people possessed by outsiders, whose ultimate fantasy was to someday see those Roman pigs drown in the sea. But it's more than just a protest story, because this man is more than a metaphor. He is a real person, a broken man with a broken spirit who has become a scapegoat for the whole community. The late theologian Walter Wink once suggested that perhaps the community there had been colluding with this man all along. They would feed him, keep him alive, bind him with chains that he was always able to repeatedly break. Why would they do this? They did it because they couldn't directly fight back against Rome's war machine that occupied their land for fear of retaliation. But they could repeatedly act out their fantasies of revenge through this demon-possessed man. It's called scapegoating, and it's the oldest trick in the book. It's the practice of singling out a person or a group of people for unmerited blame and negative treatment. It's blame shifting and then punishing others when we don't want to change our situation or deal with our problems. But when Jesus crosses over to the other side to bring compassion and mercy to the wreckage of this man's life, he leaves the entire community to finally deal with their problem, their real demon that occupies their collective life. Can you think of some common scapegoats today? We don't have to look very far to find them. Have you ever wondered, for example, why our military veterans represent the largest group of America's homeless population? Today, 40% of all homeless men in the U.S. are U.S. veterans. 6,000 of them live within a 4-square block in Los Angeles called Skid Row. Skid Row was a sea of human misery, more awful than that local cemetery where they chained our friend named Legion. And we consign our most broken veterans to places like Skid Row because we don't want to see them. And we don't want to see them because they remind us of our often flawed decisions to go to war. And they remind us of the horrors our troops endure in war and the incalculable and enduring toll that war always takes on humans, and our inexcusable failure to heal them upon their return. And of course, the countless ways the military-industrial complex profits from war. Our homeless veterans are, in so many ways, the scapegoats of our own nation's shortcomings. Have you ever noticed how, after every mass shooting in the U.S., some will refer to the perpetrators of those atrocities as monsters, even though they're actually humans? But they call them monsters because, well, we have this gun violence problem in the U.S., and it's as demonic as the legions that occupied the country of Gerasene. But a lot of people today profit from that $51 billion demon, and they feel guilty about that, especially when entire classrooms of children die. And so monster becomes a convenient way to blame shift and avoid responsibility and alleviate that guilt. Have you ever wondered why there are now some United Methodist congregations in the U.S. that are leaving our denomination? Many assume it's over homosexuality and gay marriage and LGBTQ inclusion, but it's not really about sexual orientation. It's actually about theological orientation. Progressives and conservatives in the church have disagreed about theological matters for decades. And unwilling to resolve those differences peacefully, conservatives in the early 1970s opted to scapegoat an entire group of people as a strategy to magnify those theological differences. And over time, that strategy of homophobia turned out to grow a lot of big churches with very big budgets in communities where 50 years later, it's now highly unprofitable to preach the radically inclusive love of Jesus. Every community, every institution, every church, every person has its share of better angels and shadowy demons. It's the nature of life, but Jesus dares to exorcise those shadowy demons so the better angels among us can breathe a little easier. Only it always comes at a cost. And the key to this whole story is understanding that exorcising the personal and societal demons that haunt us will actually cost us something. And that's the point of those pigs that hurtle over the cliff and are drowned in the sea. You know, somebody owned those pigs. Somebody had a financial interest in those pigs. Those pigs were someone's livelihood. And that someone was probably not very happy about what happened to his pigs when Jesus came to town. And everyone else in that community probably wondered if their pigs were next. And nobody wanted to sacrifice their pigs so that the community could get better. Because sure, everything really is better with bacon, so long as it's not my bacon. Exercising the demons that possess us will always cost us something. C.S. Lewis wrote about this imaginary scene unfolding in the forecourt of heaven. An angel is speaking to this shadowy, oily man with a red lizard sitting on his shoulder. That lizard represents all the man's demons. It constantly twitches its tail like a whip and whispers things into the man's ear. The lizard is an ugly thing, but this man has convinced himself over a lifetime that he loves it, that he cannot live without it, as we often do with our demons. The angel asks repeatedly if the man will allow him to kill the lizard, to dispel the shadow, to cast out the demon, but the man resists. "How can I tell you to kill it?" he asks. "You'd kill me if you did." "It's not so," the angel says. But the man protests. "Why, you're hurting me now." And the angel says, "I never said I wouldn't hurt you. I said it wouldn't kill you." The man haltingly gives his permission, and the angel takes the lizard and breaks it and throws it to the ground. And the man crumbles and cries out in honest agony. But then he rises. And he stands tall, and his height increases nearly to that of the angel. And his oily, shadowy countenance becomes suffused with light. Even the lizard is transformed into a stallion, which returns to the man as a companion. And then the man begins to weep, but as Lewis says, his tears were liquid love and brightness. After Jesus healed the demon-possessed man, why did all the people beg Jesus to leave their town? Sometimes the cost is just too high, and the demons are just too beloved. When God crosses over to the other side to free us from the things that possess us, the forces that occupy us, will we be willing to let them die? Or will we beg Jesus to go away? Our takeaways for today: every institution, every community, every person has its share of angels and demons. God in Christ comes to free us from the things that possess us. And freedom from our personal and societal demons will always cost us something.